I want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's program, We Are Resilient, a conversation across Chinatowns to bring Chinatown communities together across North America, from New York to Boston, to Toronto, to San Francisco's Chinatowns, together to address urgent concerns in our various neighborhoods at this time and communities, coming together for unity, solidarity, and community care. If this is your first time at a WOW event, apologies again for the technical difficulties, but welcome. Finally, we're so excited that you're here. My name is Yuki. I'm the development director here at WOW. To give you some context, the WOW project is housed in the oldest operating store in the heart of Manhattan's Chinatown. It is a woman and non-binary led community-based initiative using arts and activism to resist cultural displacement. We're so excited to be kicking off the WOW Project's 4-year anniversary series with some month-long programming. We're calling our program Community Care as Community Medicine, centering community care and resiliency at a time when we need it the most. Through these programs, we open up space to explore what healing, resiliency, and grounding can look like as we experience and emerge from this moment of grief, rage, and most importantly, hope. Through WOW's 4-year anniversary fund programming and fundraising campaign, we invite you to celebrate the building of this cultural movement here in Chinatown, our neighborhood's resiliency, and the movement for Black lives. We believe care and healing, especially in community, is key to a pathway to our collective liberation. With this said, acknowledging this complex moment with the Chinatown community being greatly impacted by the racial and economic effects of COVID-19 as our comrades fight for Black lives and for racial justice throughout the country. In honor of this, in the WOW's 4-year anniversary, we will be fundraising for a total of $50,000. Thank you so much to everyone who's already donated. 50% of our funds will go towards supporting WOW's 5th year of programming, and the other 50%, split between 25, will go towards an initiative that supports community resiliency in the wake of COVID-19, and the other 25% will be going to Communities United for Police Reform, a New York City campaign fighting for community safety and police accountability. Our work doesn't stop with fundraising. These historic uprisings for Black lives have called us into thinking deeply about how we can show up in this moment as Asian Americans, as an Asian American organization rooted in Chinatown. We will not only continue to use arts and activism to resist the gentrification and displacement in our neighborhood, but we also are committed to centering political education in all of our work, including doing the internal work as a team. We'd like to give a land acknowledgement before we begin to show respect for Indigenous peoples and to recognize their enduring relationship to the land and to correct the stories and practices that erases Indigenous peoples' histories and cultures and instead invite truth and honor. WOW is a place-based initiative, and it's important to recognize that Manhattan's Chinatown is on unceded Lenape land, part of Lenape territory. We'd like to take a minute to reflect on what it means to be occupying Lenape land. So we'll take a minute to think about that, especially those of us who are settlers, even recent immigrants or gentrifiers, as part of a cycle of displacement, and what that means for liberation of Asian Americans, queer, trans, and people of color. Thank you, everyone. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. I want to note that we have 2 ASL interpreters with us today, Travis and Gloshonda. For our audience, we will do our best to spotlight them. You can also pin Travis and Gloshonda's screens by hovering over the videos of their tiles, and then you can click the 3 dots that appear next to their names, and from there you can choose pin video. However, every 15 or 20 minutes or so, they'll be transitioning and we'll make sure to spotlight the interpreter. So this event is being recorded so we can widely share and document this momentous gathering. I just want to take a moment to appreciate everyone who's in the room. There are 95 people right now. That's amazing. Thank you so much for your patience. So excited right now to be in community with everyone. Again, so since this event is being recorded, feel free to message our team behind the scenes if you have any comments, questions, or concerns. The names are Kristen, Joy, Nisma, and Bonnie. They have the word tech support in brackets following their names. That hasn't happened. Maybe if they could do that, that'd be awesome. So they'll be working hard to gather any questions, resources, and generative conversations going on in the chat. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do a Q&A today. So instead, we'll route the questions to the folks who they're pointed to and also use them to inform future program. We'll be sharing our community agreements in the chat in 1 second. These agreements will help guide us as we create a generative space to have urgent and at times difficult conversations while recognizing we all come from different places of knowing and growing. Those who do not abide by our agreements will be removed. With all that being said, I would like to send it over to our amazing moderator, Adriel Lewis, community organizer, artist, and curator for the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. Adriel, on to you.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I guess just a quick check on how everyone is feeling. If you're in the chats, I've been, I know that especially when we have like 100 people in the room, it can be difficult to kind of like know how to chime in, how to provide support. So let's just try this out, right? Like if you hear any points or anything that is inspiring to you or that you just kind of want to underscore, just like drop some ones in the chat like this, blip, 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 right? Like, I don't know. It's kind of been like a nice way to show support. It's super easy to do. You can just kind of like type it in, but like, I think that like, as people are speaking, oftentimes, I can tell you from personal experience right now, like there's points where you're just kind of like, is anything I'm saying landing, And so in the spirit of community support, in the spirit of the fact that this is an amazing, dope moment where we have all these Chinatowns coming together, we just want to open up pathways for folks in the audience to provide some support. So just like real quick, drop some ones in the chat real quick. Yeah. All right, cool. Word, see how much adrenaline that gives us digitally? Beautiful. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Adriel Lewis. My pronouns are he, him. I am tuning in from Chumash Tongfa land, otherwise known as Venice, California, on the west side of Los Angeles area. As Yuki mentioned, I come into the work that I do as an artist, as a community organizer, and really it's art and creativity that led me into the world of organizing. And so it's really special to me to be able to link up with W.O.W, which has also been so rooted in sharing culture and art as a lens for community organizing. My family comes from Toisan village. We were then refugees to Hong Kong, and then through multiple migration pathways through Mexico City and California, I grew up in the Bay Area, Ohlone land, and just I guess to share a little bit about myself that's like less from a professional tip, I'll share one of my favorite childhood Chinatown memories. So my grandpa had a photo studio in Chinatown, San Francisco. And as a kid, I just remember sitting in the back seat of the car, and every time my parents would go to visit, there'd be this moment where like my dad would pull up next to this like egg tart spot, and my mom would just bust out the car, and then my dad would just circle the block until he would see her again, and then she'd pop back into the car with a huge pink box of dantats, and I guess that's how I know that we have hype beasts running in the family, because they would just like line up around the block for delicious pastries. And I feel it in my bones because every time I'm in New York City, even if I'm staying in the far reaches of Queens, I have to at some point head over to Double Crispy in Manhattan Chinatown and get my Portuguese style dantats. So as someone who has never lived in a Chinatown, and for those of you who are tuning in and maybe wondering how does how does Chinatown play a role in my life? Maybe you identify as Chinese or Asian or not. Maybe you've frequented Chinatowns or you just know of them from afar. But you know, these are communities that don't run purely on residents. They also run on memory and on people who come in and support. And so just want to take a moment to appreciate all of you. Drop some ones for yourself for tuning in on a Saturday, and we'll get started. So I guess before we go into the questions, I also wanted to just do an acknowledgement of the different cities that are represented all throughout Turtle Island / North America. And so this is not in particular order of the conversations, but just wanted to shout out the different cities. And then, you know, we'll specifically do shout outs to the people as we open the conversations. So get ready, put your fingers on the one button key rather for Seattle, Coast Salish territory. We also recognize tribes including Duwamish and Suquamish. And representing Seattle, we have the Chinatown International Coalition. Drop your ones. Yeah. All right. Oakland, California, Chochenyo Ohlone land. We have the Asian Youth Promoting Advocacy and Leadership, aka APAL. Drop your ones. Also in the Bay, representing the Bay Area, San Francisco, Ramaytush Ohlone land. We have Chinese Culture Center of San Francisco. Blup, blup, blup. And right here, the neighbors, Los Angeles, LA, Gabrielino and Tongfa land. We have Chinatown Community for Equitable Development. Yeah. All right. And up in Canada, we have Edmonton, Papashesh, Métis land, also recognizing Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Sioux, and Blackfoot. We have Aya Collective. Drop your ones for Aya. Aya, yi, ya. Okay, over to the East Coast, we have Boston, traditionally Massachusetts terrain. We have Chinatown Progressive Association, the Chinese Youth Initiative. Let me say that again. I just want to make sure I said that correctly. We have the Chinese Progressive Association, Chinese Youth Initiative. Drop your ones. As well for the Powell Art Center, also representing Boston. Yeah. And last but not least, place I hold dearly, place I lived in for the last 7 years, Washington, D.C., Piscataway Nation, 1882 Project. Drop your ones. Yeah. All right, cool. So I'm thrilled. We have all these Chinatowns. I mean, drop some ones if you heard some cities you didn't even know had a Chinatown. I mean, there's just this incredible presence all throughout Turtle Island, all throughout the world of these communities. And so today we're going to be talking about resilience. And I know that like at times the word resilient can maybe come off as a little bit patronizing, you know, like oftentimes we'll hear the word resilient when we hear about a community that's like been through some kind of natural disaster or some kind of traumatic moment. And then it's sort of like, you know, they're so resilient and eloquent, right? And so I really wanted to just take a quick moment to like unpack the word resilient, because I think at face value, it might seem like it's just about surviving, just about sort of weathering the storm and still being around. But really, when it comes to resilience, I think about resilience as not just kind of like being able to like make it through, but actually being able to really digest and experience wholly the things that happen to us in this world, and taking those moments of adversity and responding with ever more creativity and ever more openness and ever more togetherness, so that through these tough moments that could serve to break us down, rather they make us stronger. We look back and we realize that without these moments of struggle, we would not be who we are today. And to me, that's resilience. And so, you know, we'll continue to unpack that over the course of the next while. Just really quickly, the way that this is going to be formatted is we'll have 4 short conversations around different elements of resilience. And that's where we'll be inviting these amazing organizers and folks from these different Chinatowns. We'll begin with a short conversation about support and resilience from within. So how are we showing tenderness and care to each other? How are Chinatown showing tenderness and care within these geographic communities? And then we'll expand the conversation into bound liberations. And what we mean by that is, you know, that Chinatown is not just exclusively serving people of Chinese or even Asian descent. And in the spirit of resilience, we recognize that we become stronger by acknowledging and embracing the communities that are adjacent to Chinatown, as well as communities of that lands present and past. You know, we think about what it means to be resilient in our Chinatowns while acknowledging and respecting the millennia in which indigenous folks have called these spaces home, and what does it mean to live in solidarity and harmony with that context. And then we'll talk about some intergenerational solidarity, you know, so how are young folks and our elders coming together and developing strategies and strengthening their relationships. And lastly, we'll talk about rootedness and resilience. So at the end of the day, we know, you know, people are trying to build Krispy Kremes up in our spot. And so how do we, you know, sorry if you work at Krispy Kreme, you know, how do we, you know, stay rooted in our communities, you know, like how do we stay present, and how do we do that both physically in terms of actually keeping Chinatowns physically around, and also how do we continue to pass tradition, which is really why these Chinatowns came to be in the first place. So with that said, enough of me. If you're ready for some convo, drop your ones real quick. Make sure you're still around. Word. All right. So cool. We'll begin with our first conversation. And again, this is about support and resilience from within. We have 3 amazing folks who are going to come and join us. We have Mei Lum from W.O.W, the W.O.W project representing New York City. We have Vida K, an artist, an organizer representing San Francisco. And we have Jenny Lowe, representing the 1882 project out of Washington, D.C. You know, just get them present, get them in the spotlight and all that. Yeah. And also definitely stay tuned to the chat, because you know, for the purposes of time, we're not going to be like reading hella bios, but we will be having a conversation where ideally you're kind of able to get some points. So definitely encourage you to revisit these chats if you'd like some more information, and definitely follow these folks. If you go on W.O.W and Co on Instagram, you'll see all these organizations tagged. So word, Mei Lum, let's get started with you. Well, basically for folks tuning in, all 3 of the folks speaking today have been initiating these beautiful love letter projects, which Mei can describe a bit further. But Mei, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about, you know, about how you feel these love letters are continuing the traditions and legacies of what began with W.O.W and what you've envisioned and what you've experienced with that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Adriel, and thank you to everyone who's in the room today on a Saturday. We're really excited. I'm going to quickly share my screen to give some visuals to what I talk about. Great. So, as Adriel mentioned, the W.O.W project started something called Love Letters to Chinatown. And it was during a time when we were having a team meeting talking through what our art and activism looks like in this moment in a state where our community is really in need of essential services, in need of food, money to pay their rent. And for us, it was tough to come to terms with that and see where we could uplift and support our community in this time. And this was in February or late March when we all were sheltering in place. And so one of our team members, Huang B. Chan, came up with this idea called Love Letters to Chinatown as a way to uplift our community in its darkest time and remind ourselves that we are resilient. You see here, we resist by waging love, and that's, I feel like, really does a good job of encompassing what we're trying to do with these letters. And we envisioned it being an open call, putting it out to folks to submit letters to write to Chinatown itself or to their favorite institutions, their favorite businesses, and for us to walk around the neighborhood and post them on the gates of these shuttered shops, in contrast to a lot of the notes of closure due to COVID. And so for us, it's a reminder of the fact that there is a thriving Chinatown full of life to look forward to beyond this moment right now, as we weather COVID and as we show up for the Black Lives Matter movement. And also to resist and change the narrative of Chinatown as the neighborhood is considered a hub for where COVID started. Because as you all know, I'm sure you've been feeling in your Chinatowns that the impact of COVID started way before we all were in quarantine and sheltering in place. For us in Manhattan's Chinatown, we were feeling that in January. So yeah, I wanted to show some of the photos of submissions that we received to give you a sense of where we're coming from in uplifting our community with these letters. Tomia Arai is in the room. This is one of her submissions. We also have Flushing Chinatown, a letter to them. So yeah, lots of illustrations, color, vibrancy. We also have photos of where they were posted. So we did that as a team, and we also had really incredible volunteers support us in that. So part of it is sharing with the business if they're open, and also sharing with the residents that also pop by and see what we're doing. We've seen just a lot of curiosity and excitement for what these letters are about and what they're doing and why they're showing up in the neighborhood. Yeah, so I don't want to take up too much space or time. That's a little taste of what we're doing here in Manhattan's Chinatown, here in New York City. But I wanted to open it up to Vida in SF, because I know that you and Carmen are also forging a Love Letters to Chinatown project, and would love to hear your observations, things that you've been seeing in submissions and reactions from folks. So I'll pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vida. I'm from San Francisco, Chinatown, and another one of my creative partners is not present today. Her name is Carmen Chen. We are speaking from Ramaytush-Yalamu land. And I just want to say that we're not representing a formalized organization, even though both of us are very involved in various community groups. So I myself am an artist based here in San Francisco, Chinatown, and Carmen and I are both residents. She herself is a college student right now, majoring in psychology and sociology, and we both brought together Love Letters for Chinatown in San Francisco after seeing the project first start out in New York. And I think there was a lot of like momentum because people had wanted to kind of put, I guess, like put their emotions and also like their reactions on what's been happening, especially around like anti-Asian violence and racism in that was happening like throughout the pandemic. And I think like there's been a lot of different reactions here in Chinatown. I might segue a little bit outside of the project if that's okay. And so as when I'm talking about like anti-Asian racism, a community reaction to that is one, you know, our Love Letters for Chinatown project, right? And that's garnered a lot of different responses, especially from young people who grew up in Chinatown or who currently live in Chinatown or frequent Chinatown. And another community response to anti-Asian racism was patrol groups. And I'm sure that there's also like patrol groups that I've been hearing like in different parts of like New York and Seattle. And there have been like 2 patrol groups that started in Chinatown with like different ideologies around community safety, policing, and also different politics around like policing our like Black tenants and our homeless Chinatown residents. So that's been something that's been kind of very heavy on the forefront of my mind. And I know that Chinatown is a very special place for a lot of people. And on one hand, there's like a response, an art response, right? And then on the other hand, there's like more like direct action responses. And I think right now I'm just sitting with kind of how we move forward given this movement. In this moment, the movement for Black lives and for Black liberation, Chinatown's role in this, because we've always had a long history that not many people, you know, like are educated about, which is like the police brutality that has happened in Chinatown, like since the beginning of Chinatown, right, in San Francisco, which formed the Red Guards, which formed the alliance with the Black Panther Party. And I think right now in 2020, we're revisiting what community safety looks like, given our legacy that not many people are familiar with, but also given the legacy of the movement for Black lives and how we reorient community safety. And I think the Love Letters for Chinatown is something very beautiful because I think there's unity in art and there's unity in the sense of like belonging and this shared sense of like wanting to be safe and make this place home. But I think as a community member and as an artist, it's always important for me to think like who are we making home for, who are we making home safe for. So that's kind of been like what's been happening here in San Francisco, Chinatown.
Word. Thank you so much, May and Vida. Drop your ones for May and Vida. This is a great time to bring in Jenny Lowe from the 1882 Project, because I think that unlike New York and San Francisco, DC has quite a different context with this Chinatown, with a history of displacement. If you've been to DC Chinatown, sometimes you might not be sure if you're in DC Chinatown. So Jenny, could you speak a bit more about presence and what it looks like given the context of DC Chinatown to like May said, wage love, and like Vida said, to think about what community support looks like?
Yeah, definitely. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Sure.
While I talk? Okay, I have my visuals I like to put up too. Um, so yeah, DC's Chinatown is a very different place in comparison to like New York City or San Francisco or even Chicago's. It's like the tiniest probably of all of them. And there's this general narrative. I think it was important what May said about changing a narrative. Our narrative in sort of the public image, the mainstream narrative is about a shrinking Chinatown. So often people call it China Block is sort of the name, which is a huge disservice. So all of this work that we did with Dear Chinatown is an outgrowth of Ted Gong and the 1882 Foundation's work. They've been in the DC metro area for about 3 decades. And there's so much about the community that's very complex and also very diverse. So past, present residences, including also current residences. So this project came out of a frustration about gentrification processes. And often we think of gentrification once it's done, that it's over. We can't do anything about it and we're sort of powerless against it. So I want to change that narrative. It's about how can we create the mechanics to give power to the people that are affected by decision making. So this image is of a pretty significant, a couple of different blocks in DC's Chinatown that's really close to the subway station. A lot of what development is happening there is very much focused on commercial and tourism, and doesn't speak to the narratives about this was a residential neighborhood. It was about families. There was kids that hung out in the streets. People hung out in the alleys and so forth. So this was really a reaction to being like, city planners, you fundamentally do not know how to run engagement. So how can we show them how it's done? So we created this Dear Chinatown pop-up with the 1882 Foundation, leveraging some different types of infrastructure and resources in DC, the Humanities Truck, which is like a community museum, and also the Smithsonian Community Museum's Right to the City exhibit. So we made a little kit, people came over and made their own poster. We also had opportunities, people could be interviewed, and we had the exhibit up and people can see. We also had like oral histories playing on the truck too. So a lot of people, it was during the Lunar New Year parade this year. So people came up and saw their images or saw their friends on the screen and had conversations. So some of these posters came from that event during the New Year parade. And then we also had a workshop with 1882 Foundation's monthly talk story events, where people could make posters, and it ended up being a really nice time for sort of learning and sharing about memories too. So ultimately we built this as some calls to action for urban planning, being like, you need to get with some certain things. There's accessibility issues. Participatory processes are like really extractive, and they don't amplify the communities that work there and support these places. So this is really trying to like move the needle and transform how our neighborhoods are shaped.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jenny. I mean, I think, yeah, I remember when I first moved to DC, I was walking around Chinatown and I saw like a group of tourists from China, like walking around, and like the look of confusion on their face sort of, you know, really demonstrated to me the need for this kind of presence. I think DC Chinatown is definitely a place where it hinges so much on the human connections because of just all of the ways that you know, storefronts, businesses, and institutions have been displaced. And so what you mentioned about how gentrification as an idea oftentimes doesn't account for people once they've been displaced, right? You know, like if you go to DC and you complain about not being able to find a lot of Asian restaurants, people are like, well, you can cross state lines and go to Virginia. And so, you know, shout out to Jeff Chang, who, you know, also speaks about gentrification as a larger process of resegregation, right? Which also accounts for those folks who once lived in DC, but now have had to move over to like PG County and over to Virginia because DC is just hella expensive, very unaffordable to live in. So I appreciate all three of you. I guess I just wanted to take a moment real quick to also shout out Hopes for Chinatown, which is another similar project that CCC is associated, the Chinese Community Center, Chinese Culture Center, sorry, of San Francisco, and Christine Wong Yap, who's an artist that's leading that. I guess really quickly, maybe if one of you would like to speak on this, like how do you envision, for example, the fact that there are these different love letter projects happening? Like, what might be a good sort of like tangible mini first step to you know, to support for these projects to support and uphold each other?
I can start. So for us at the WOW project, we're really fortunate to be working with Aaron Reese, who's in the room. We're trying to bring our love letters to a website, an interactive map where folks can hover and see where we posted the letters, but for the letters to also be open source is the end goal. So folks can hop onto the website, download, and do their own posting themselves. I think we want it to be as accessible to folks to start their own initiatives in their own Chinatowns as possible. Yeah, I'll just add that and I'll pass it to Vida to see if she has anything to add.
I think I have to first start off with thanking May and all the folks at the WOW project and Hui Ying for initiating this love letters for Chinatown. I think when Carmen and I first saw it, we just were, it was very touching, and to just kind of put some love out into our community like that. And ever since then, we've been in touch with May and Hui Ying, and we hope that, like, for this project at least, like we've been trying to make sure that it's accessible and that it's translated, and that we have like various like people from our young people to our elders to try and like submit letters. So we've also been doing outreach around that. I think overall we want to continue with like more collaboration like down the line, because I think our communities are very much connected.
Word.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, Jenny, real quick, just because I'm seeing in the chat, some people are wondering a little bit about the sort of dynamic with like Rockville, and then also if you don't mind speaking to like maybe how business owners that you're aware of have responded to these.
Yeah, so May I, Vida, I love that it's ongoing and participatory, and we're trying to sort of figure out what the next steps for your Chinatown is to be a similar way, because it should be something that's growing and living. So the intention was that it was mobile, and that's where it's like you take that truck or however it is and take it to people, and people then will able to participate. So it's like an offering, and with the pandemic, obviously we're trying to figure out that challenge, because it was supposed to be in person, an experiential activity, and there's interaction. So the next step is actually, we're doing a project with businesses and some cultural spaces to do a documentation project. So there's a corner market, there's a acupuncture shop, and then there's a Buddhist temple all in the same block. And we're going to be trying to figure out some version of that to collect oral histories and interviews to capture the social histories of these spaces, because the city doesn't really look at preservation from like lived experience. It's more about buildings and architecture. So as things continue to be under threat, the next steps are trying to do some more documentation of capturing more stories.
Word. Thank you so much. Everybody drop your ones for love, for all these love letter projects. We're in the interest of time, gonna just really quickly flash a prompt for the love letters for Chinatown project, just so you can kind of see, you know, like what are some of the questions. And also, you know, drop your ones for our ASL interpreters. This will be an excellent time for folks to transition as we move on to the next conversation. Yeah, really appreciate, you know, the work it takes to listen deeply and interpret for the folks who are benefiting from interpreters. So shout out to our interpreters, yo. So yeah, let's flash the prompt real quick, and then for the next speakers on deck, we'll you know, take a breath together. Let's all take a breath together. Can we do that? All right. I'm gonna ask you to inhale, exhale. All right. I was telling May on these Zoom calls, my forehead gets progressively shiny. So, you know, if I do that, just know it's to protect your eyes across the digital space. All right. So Yuki, would you like me to read this, or did you want to drop in and read this real quick?
I'll drop in and read. Thanks so much for leading that collective breath. Definitely needed that. And I love watching the participants go from 109 to 111. Shout out to 111. Yes, here's our prompt. Big shout out to Huang Bichan for coming up with it. Our prompt is: consider Chinatown as a living being. What would you say to Chinatown during this time? What do you want her to know? What stories do you want to share? So yeah, I'll let that sink in for a moment as we ground and recenter ourselves and get ready for the next conversation.
Cool. And so definitely check out the websites and the Instagram accounts for these organizations. Again, they're if you go to the W.O.W. & Co. Instagram, you'll see them all tagged, and if you follow those through, you'll very quickly find these projects. And so if you'd like to contribute, if you live near a Chinatown that could use a love letter, I mean, I don't know who doesn't, who can't use a love letter, right? So, you know, definitely take this as an opportunity to you know, exert some love, yo. It's a time right now where I think a lot of us could use that. So yeah, moving on to conversation number 2. Vida, thank you so much for, you know, really setting the stage for a conversation around bound liberations. When we talk about bound liberations, I know that, you know, I want to acknowledge the incredible work that's been done that I've been seeing online. You know, the fact that now anti-Blackness within Asian communities and Black and Asian solidarity is not a fringe conversation, which it was considered a sort of a fringe conversation just, you know, not too long ago, you know. And so I think it's, even though there's a lot of work to do, I think there's a real testament to the fact that so many of us, especially younger folks, are bringing this through. So I'm super excited about this conversation. And so, like I said, we have the Chinese Culture Center from San Francisco, and representing there is the curator Hoi Liang. We have the Aya Collective out of Edmonton, Canada, and there we have, you know, they roll deep. You know, they're like, we're representing all of Canada. So we have Sean Say, Grace Law, Wai Ling Lenin, and Lan Chan. And then, you know, if that wasn't enough, we have CPA, we have the Chinese Youth Initiative coming out of the Chinese Progressive Association, and representing CPA, we have Issei Matsumoto and Xiaoyin Chu. So everybody drop your ones for these folks, drop your ones. And so I guess maybe if we could get started with CCC. I mean, one of the things I think is really dope about this dynamic of organizations is Within the United States, we have San Francisco and Boston, right? And for me, growing up in the Bay, I remember whenever people from the East Coast would visit, like when I pick them up from the airport, they're just like, what is this diverse Mecca, right? And oftentimes people can assume that the Bay is just like this utopia of diversity and intersectionality. I mean, that again, a testament to a lot of great work that's been done in California. And then on the other side, oftentimes Boston can be sort of flattened into this interpretation of like a super segregated and racially divided space. And so I'm really interested in how bound liberations, particularly with neighboring Black communities, somewhere like San Francisco, I guess, Hoy, if you could speak to, your experience in Chinatown, San Francisco, especially given right now in SF, being a place that is so historically Black, that now, so many of the Black folks, most of the Black folks have been displaced. And how do you think about that in the work that you do with CCC? You might want to unmute yourself, perhaps. I think we hear you now. You want to speak again, Hoy? Yeah, we got you. Yay. Drop your ones for Hoy.
Yeah, so CCC, like many other organizations that we coexist with in San Francisco's Chinatown, were founded at the end of the Civil Rights Movement, and also a very significant event that was the anti-eviction movement of iHotel. And iHotel was very symbolic in the sense that it was at the end of a series of redevelopment that was happening across the city that has already displaced many Black neighborhoods or Asian neighborhoods or Latino neighborhoods. And so at that point, iHotel became almost a significant, it's not only a significant time in history, but a symbolic moment in people's mind that we must fight for this now. It's so urgent, otherwise it's too late. And that in itself was a 10-year movement. And for me, working in an art and culture organization, I can't help but think about that. What was the energy at that time? What was there like a cultural proliferation at that moment as well? What were the people thinking about? And for me to relate to that, we can also bring in that it was also the time where the universities were having strikes. It was the Third World Liberation Front. It was to demand ethnic studies in both SF states and also UC Berkeley. So it was a time where people were really thinking about how do we democratize, right? Not privatize aspects of people's life, such as education, such as art, such as housing. So it was really inspirational for me to first learn about iHotel at its current building, which now has a mural at its facade and also photographs depicting the night of the eviction. And so I think about how do we have an imagination of a space that is no longer there? So it's really kind of all these moments coming together, and not to mention that was the time was also the occupation of Alcatraz as well. And folks from Third World Liberation Front show up for everything. And it was also during that time where there's also a proliferation of artists and art that's happening in the city. So people are really trying to care for themselves and be vocal and individual, and also being mindful of their roots and their culture and differences, and finding liberation through working with each other. With that said, San Francisco is very segregated at this moment, and we understand that. And also that Chinatown is not a monolith. Chinatown has a very diverse, it's mostly Chinese, but then there's a rising number of other races that live in this neighborhood. So this is the change that's happening, and also echoing the change that had happened because of the 1965 Immigration Act that has brought another wave of immigrants. And so it's really kind of these layers of people based on where they come from, the time they came, what their childhood is like, speaking to each other, and to layer into contemporary issues such as Black Lives Matter. That's where the conversation begins, and that's all the context we have to hold and keep in mind as we produce events and form partnership with our social justice or direct services counterparts in the neighborhood. And I think I'll stop here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hoy. Really appreciate that context. And I know for me, growing up in the Bay, you know, I took for granted the fact that, for example, I had Asian American studies at my high school at James Logan in Union City. You know, like I just thought that was the case everywhere in the country, and then you find out that that's not true at all. But you know, I think for those of us who have had the chance to grow up in these places where solidarity work has been done for so long, it really is on us to make sure that that continues to be transmitted, especially right now, while there are so many questions and so many people who are just becoming introduced to the idea of solidarity with Black folks, with Latinx folks, with Indigenous folks, and so I really appreciate you bringing that context. And so I wanted to also at this point bring in Issei and Xiaoyan out of Boston, out of the Chinese Youth Initiative. Can you speak a bit, maybe for folks who haven't been to Boston's Chinatown or might have a flattened understanding of Boston's historic dynamics, how you're thinking about bound liberations?
Xiaoyan, do you want to go first, or?
Up to you. You can go first.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go then. We are youth coordinators at the Chinese Youth Initiative in CPA Boston. And right now, for Boston at least, there is a strong legacy of residential segregation, school segregation, of course, that like puts Black communities away from predominantly white communities. But outside of that narrative, Chinatown often gets left out as also a result of residential segregation. And I would just say that that narrative doesn't also leave room for the ways that even under segregation, people have lived and worked together, even if they live somewhat separate lives. So, for example, like during the busing crisis in Boston, there was fierce activism among communities that were predominantly Black, but there was also a lot of activism in Chinatown. And that's a story that often doesn't get talked about, but ultimately, like, those struggles were facing the same corrupt and morally bankrupt schooling system in Boston at the time. Yeah, and also in the 1980s, we had a police brutality incident against a middle-aged Chinese cook who was he had immigrated to Chinatown 10 months previously, and had gotten beaten by a cop, and the city ended up giving back like some $100,000+ in back pay to the cop, and settled with the cook some like $80,000. So the city ended up giving more money to the cop that had beaten him than the cook. And as a result, because of the sort of fracturing in the community, in order to get a strong response, communities across Boston had to respond and come together to call for reforms against the Boston Police Department. So those are the sort of histories that we are trying to uncover and give space for the youth in our program to learn about fully.
Word. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think now is also a great time to bring in our friends from the Aya Collective out from Edmonton. And one of the reasons I'm really excited that we have some Canada presence here is, when I began traveling to places like Canada, Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, I became introduced to land acknowledgement protocol. Maybe some of you who are joining today, when you're hearing these native lands, the naming of these spaces, this might be a new concept to you. And if so, welcome. So with Aya, I was wondering if you could speak, along with the bound liberation with Black folks. Also, how are you thinking about bound liberations with the Indigenous context of where you're situated?
Hi everybody. I'm Sean, and I have 3 other people from Aya here, so feel free to jump in. But I think here in Edmonton, so Miskwichi Waskahegan, which means Beaver Hills House, is a lot of the Indigenous communities here. We see a lot of, we'll say even parallels with like, the American neighbors, where there's just like an overrepresentation of incarceration and just injustice when it comes to how Indigenous communities are treated. And recognizing also, as I'm still learning and decolonizing just my own ways of life, realizing how Turtle Island, so encompassing, all of North America basically, was, Indigenous lands, right? And so it's, it's still constantly a struggle to not just like understand from an individual perspective how I'm connected to Indigenous movements, but also, that education piece, right? Because I think as we all in the Asian community know, like it's already pretty tough intergenerationally sometimes to educate one another about racism. And so regardless of, which race that is, I could admittedly say I've been in many family gatherings where it's, I would say, impossible to educate my own family members. And so, it's, I think it's an ongoing strategy, I'd say, but we do try to really practice intergenerationally, and I'm so glad that Lan and Weiling are here. So I would love to invite them to kind of offer their thoughts on this as well.
Thanks, Sean. I just want to build on the idea of that Chinatown is on Indigenous land, and when we are, fighting for Chinatown, we have to remember that the land that we are on, whose land, like we are part of the system that displaces Indigenous people. So yeah, I think when our Chinatown is being gentrified, when we see arts and culture being moved in, it's complicated because there are collectives and artists that are also Indigenous that are moving into Chinatown. So how do we engage in that complicated dialogue as we talk about this geographic and emotional borders that is Chinatown, but it's also the inner city. It's also indigenous land, and the way our cities are mapped is reflective of the values that are laid on our land. And I feel like Andrea Smith's 3 pillars of white supremacy is valuable to unpack the complexity of colonialism and gentrification, and the idea of the philosophy of terra nullius, which is Latin for nobody's land, is the same philosophy that allowed Western European countries to colonize indigenous land, and is the same philosophy that's used in gentrification in Chinatown. I don't know if Lan or Wai-Ling has anything to say.
I can add to, I support what Sean, this is Lan, what Sean and Grace have said about borders. One thing about Chinatown in Edmonton is that we are facing different borders. And I think Grace expressed that well. One of the other thing that we also need to, we are kind of an internal challenge we're facing is Chinese who, older Chinese who have been here for generations or settled in Chinatown a long time ago, plus recent Chinese new immigrants. We already, within just the Chinese themselves, we are struggling in terms how to be inclusive. And there are different views of Chinatown between the older Chinese in Chinatown versus the new Chinese in Chinatown. So that's something that we in the Chinese community, we're trying to work in perhaps closing that gap. The other thing too is the fact, and I think Grace alluded to it, is the fact that Chinatown is in the inner city. That in itself is an issue, and it's a challenge for us as well. One of the things to recognize is historically where what we call inner city, what we call Chinatown, was at one time historically in the 1880s and early 1900s was the actually downtown area for the city of Edmonton. And then over time, when the city of Edmonton moved more west, that then became a place where Chinatown started to establish itself. So we have to include historical, the history to understand why Chinatown was located the way, in the place that it is today.
Yeah, and just to add a little more, unless Wai-Ling, if you want to say anything?
No, you go ahead. I'll say a few sentences afterwards.
Yeah, so I think some of that like complexity that, and that I think the tensions that do exist interculturally here, specifically in Edmonton, is that Chinatown itself is very diverse. A lot of different cultural groups are here. You know, businesses and different social services. And one of the biggest, I guess, tensions that has been kind of on the table in our city for, I would say, the last 5 to 10 years is 3 injection sites. So there's 3 injection sites that are specifically in the Chinatown area. And so it's been very, very tense between obviously the Chinatown community members who are wondering why there are so many injection sites that are there versus the social services sector, which clearly was part of the consultation in terms of like the need for it, because in our downtown we do have you know, a very unfortunate situation with homelessness and drug abuse. And so, you know, when it comes to intercultural gathering, it's, you know, a big majority of it is Indigenous communities that are affected by the drug abuse situation. And so obviously there's tension already interculturally between Chinatown people, Chinese community, and indigenous groups. And so this is one of those things where, you know, IS sees, you know, a very long journey ahead in terms of like educating both sides and understanding where we each come from, because really it's lateral violence that's perpetuated within the system. So, you know, it's so hard to explain of all the nuances. I'm still learning it myself, but you know, trying to get people at the table and educate from both sides is, you know, obviously a very, very tough issue. And I definitely don't want to also erase any of the really important Black work that is being done here in the city. We do have a very important and prominent like Black community that is growing here. And so like they are also in Chinatown. They are also, you know, here with us. And so, you know, the one great thing that I do see from the last few months is that there is a lot of solidarity between the Black and Indigenous communities working together to really talk about systemic oppression.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I think before we cap this off, I wanted to also just pass the mic real quick over to Xiaoyan from Boston, the Chinese Youth Initiative. We haven't heard from you yet.
Hi. I just want to mention a bit about how CPA, we are trying to do some education, not like educational, but more like discussion workshops for the elderly people in our community, or maybe like residents in all age, because specifically about the BLM movement, because we feel like there are some misunderstandings sometimes from like new immigrants or like from older Chinese people about the BLM. We see a lot of media that only focus on the riot in the protest, but we do not think it's all about the riots. We believe there are people who are actually trying really hard to protest, and it's not only the riot that should be seen on media. That's why we feel like we need to like let everyone know, or at least let everyone have a chance to discuss about the BLM and what's the real reason for BLM, because I personally believe that BLM wasn't only about George Floyd, even though he is like the starting point of the protest in 2020, but we believe it's actually a burst of all the unfairness in history. And there's also a lot of oppression on Black people or minority that lead them to a stage where they cannot actually seek for better opportunities. I've heard people saying that, oh, why can't Black people just go to school and get a good job and be successful? I don't think that's true, because I don't think the society has given them enough opportunities to actually go to school and to get a good job. It's not that they don't want to, but the society did not give them the opportunity. And I think maybe many people don't have like a specific idea on the oppression. And I feel like maybe a lot of elderly who came here, who came to the United States, or recent immigrants, they haven't had a chance to actually learn about those oppressions. And that's why we feel like it's important for us to communicate to them, because it's not that elderly don't have knowledge, but it's because they haven't got the chance to learn about it yet. And I think for youth around my age, we always get lazy talking to our grandparents about what is actually happening in all those social movements, because we think that they're just like too old to learn, or like they don't know English, that they can't learn about those stuff. But I don't think that's true. It's more like we should really take the effort to talk to them, and they would really understand. Just as long as we talk to them, they would like learn, and then we can all learn together. And that's why CPA right now is trying to have like a VChat thing. Like we're trying to post VChat articles, and we are also trying to transfer a lot of those resources to VChat for elderlies to learn, because I think VChat it's mostly about like Chinese media, and I don't think those media are promoting a lot of knowledge on the BLM movement, and that's why I think it's important for us to, you know, post something on WeChat to communicate to our elderly. Yeah.
Word. Thank you so much. Everybody drop your ones for these folks. And again, I just want to recognize, I know that people tuning in, with over 100 people tuning in, we're all in different parts of our journeys of understanding ourselves and our identities. And if you're just in the beginning of understanding Asian American studies in history and culture, for example, it might feel overwhelming to be like, oh, I need to consider these other communities too. And again, I just want to underscore the fact that our liberations are bound. And so understanding indigeneity is part of the work of understanding, you know, who you are in the place in which you sit, you know. So real quick, I'm trying not to plug myself too much, but I feel like this might be helpful. I wrote an article last year after my, I've been doing a bunch of work out in Navajo land, and my, you know, the community that I've built out there has really shifted. As someone who you know, minored in Asian American studies, been organizing in Asian American communities for so long, just in the last couple of years, my entire understanding of self and how I even think about what the term Asian American means has shifted, thanks to you know, the folks, right? And there's a lot of work to be done. And so I would just recommend to not feel discouraged if you feel like you know, there are things that you look back and you're like, oh, I was doing that, you know, like not the way I would like to move forward doing it. It's a good learning moment. You know, I think one way to begin thinking about that, for example, and this speaks specifically to our bound liberations with Black and Indigenous folks. Again, this is not a call out. This is something I learned recently. I've been saying BLM to shorten Black Lives Matter. And then out in Navajo land, BLM means Bureau of Land Management, which is a government agency actively displacing Indigenous folks, right? And so, you know, it's one more syllable to say Black Lives Matter versus BLM. And, you know, like little things like that, again, it can feel discouraging when you come across it, but these are amazing learning moments. And I feel really esteemed by the fact that we have such a caring community, you know, and folks who can engage this with love. Before we move on, also in the spirit of making sure that we're recognizing, you know, where it's due, the term, the notion of bound liberations comes from an Australian Indigenous artist, Lilla Watson. And so I just dropped a link in the chat if you want to learn more about the phrase bound liberation, the quote that comes from the activism of the 70s, where that comes from, you know, because I think we see it a lot on Instagram, and sometimes, you know, without a whole lot of intention, that erasure even actively happens on Instagram, right? So I'm just dropping that link for some additional context. So we're gonna, in the interest of time, just move on to the next conversation. These next two, first of all, drop some ones for yourselves, because we're talking about some deep stuff. And you know, these next two conversations, we've got less organizations involved, and so you know, the conversations might go a bit quicker. And what we're going to be talking about, I guess, before we do that, let's take another breath. Everybody, inhale with me. Exhale. Gonna wipe my nervous sheen if anyone else needs to, and we'll move on. So we are in the next two conversations. This was originally one conversation, but we felt like as opposed to crowding it with 4 orgs, we'll break it apart into 2. And we're talking about intergenerational solidarity, which I'll admit is I mean, I can kind of like guess what it means, but it's a new phrase for me. And so I'm really excited to hear from these folks who have been doing the work of intergenerational solidarity, and for those of us like me who are less familiar with what that means actively. I'm super excited. So this first conversation is really around intergenerational solidarity from an interpersonal organizing standpoint, people to people, youth to elder. And so I'm overjoyed that we have, you know, as an former Oakland resident, APAL has been a part of my life, my understanding of self and community for such a long time. APAL is the Asian Youth Promoting Advocacy and Leadership out of Oakland, California. And speaking from there, we have Stanley Pun. And then out of LA, we have the Chinatown Community for Equitable Development, and we've got Tito and Amy Zhao. So let's start with actually, you know, let's start with APAL. And you know, as a youth organization, I for one was not aware of the incredible work you're doing around intergenerational solidarity. So could you speak on that? What does that mean for you and in the context of Oakland?
Great. Can y'all hear me? Yeah? Okay. I guess you can, I guess. Anyway, I think a core of a lot of the work that we do is really understanding the makeup of Chinatown as a people. We, I think, have an understanding, and our young folks have an understanding that Chinatown at its core is an intergenerational space. It is just a microcosm of essentially a family. We have like extended family, we have young folks, we have adults, we have transitional age folks, kind of all occupying this space. And I think that's kind of what has kind of galvanized a lot of the organizing, especially in particular Oakland Chinatown, where a lot of gentrification, a lot of development has happened. I think in the past 5 years, we probably have maybe, I want to say 20 projects that are either directly in Chinatown or Chinatown adjacent. And I think there's an extent that insularity, I think, has been useful in the sense that I think a lot of people are engaged when your home is being threatened. And that's exactly what happened 2 years ago when the Oakland A's were attempting to build a stadium that would have been about a quarter mile away from Chinatown, next to a local community college. It didn't make, I think, any sense for the students or the elders or the families that were that live in Chinatown, that go to this school, that utilize Chinatown as a resource. We've seen kind of what stadiums have done to Chinatowns and different other ethnic enclaves. And it's just like galvanizing, I think, youth and elders to mobilize against something is I think really beautiful. To see, I think, like folks kind of, I think folks say building community a lot, and I don't know if there is like a general definition or understanding, but I think that is like the definition, is just seeing elders, families, young people all in the same space together, moving towards the same thing. And what it is about justice and also like how just development can happen. How can development be inclusive? Because we know that it's happening. And how do we get our elders and our young folks at the table to kind of sit and talk story and talk with each other and think about what are their needs and how they can kind of meet each other where they're at. And I think that's what we're kind of also seeing in this movement for Black Lives is this kind of beautiful thing where a lot of our elders have given us knowledge, whether it's about how to do X, Y, and Z, how to cook, how to relate to land. And now the young folks, I think, are educating our elders about what does justice mean in this current context. And just to kind of reflect back on the past conversations, it really is a conversation about our bound liberation and how do we fight for liberation for all of us. And that can only really be done through an intergenerational effort, because it's going to take everyone. So that's kind of where we're at. There has been a ton of organizing happening in Oakland's Chinatown, and I'm sure every other Chinatown as well. And it's the only way it's going to work is through building intergenerational solidarity with youth and elders. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stanley. Really appreciate you. Everybody drop your ones for Stanley. APAL doing incredible work. And yeah, let's take it down to Southern California. You know, I think for those of you who haven't been to California before, you know, oftentimes, you know, there's a not so much of an understanding of how distinct the Bay and LA can be. And so I'd be curious, CCED, sort of in response to what's been going on in Oakland with APAL, like how do you look at intergenerational solidarity out here in LA?
First, oh no, Tito. Do you want to go first, Tito?
Sure. I actually want to say that, like, when it comes to similarities and differences between like localities and stuff like that, there's obviously a lot of geographical differences, right? And I think like the core of our work all the time when it comes to organizing is like relationship building. And that at its heart is definitely gonna be something that is like everywhere can be applied. I talk about different things depending on like what is most relevant in a community, but at the heart of it, exactly what Stanley was saying, really, and what everyone's been saying so far in this chat. Like, so I'm so honored to like have so much knowledge be put forth right now, because like there's so many like similarities as well as nuances between all of our Chinatowns, but like definitely the key thing that I'm really getting out of here is like really the relationship building. And I think like, again, what you were saying, Adriel, with like intergenerational solidarity, it's like, oh, it's like, first, intergenerational is like a big word. There's like 5 syllables in it. So it's like, what does that even mean? And solidarity too, like, it's just like this big concept. Like, what does that mean? And I think like we really got to slow down sometimes. Like I need to slow down for the interpreter. But we need to slow down sometimes and really be like, wait, what do these big concepts mean in an embodied way? And for us at CCED, just like everyone else, it's really simple. It's just like storytelling. How do we hold space for our elders? How do we hold space for our youth, right? Not just like the college-aged youth, the teenagers, but even like little baby ones, right? How do we hold space? And I think that's the beautiful part about Chinatown, is that it has naturally developed that way. Someone, I think from DC was saying like, this is a place for families. This has always been intergenerational. We have always been holding space. And it's really about like, how do we make sure that we don't let white supremacy and like all this stuff isolate us, right? How do we reconnect with our elders? And I don't mean like in our organizing work, but I do mean like that, like organizing work, collective liberation, but also personal liberation, right? How are we making space for our parents, for our grandparents, for the young kids coming up? So like, I mean, obviously there's also very specific things and like concepts that help us like make sure that we do that. Like, so when we talk about, at least in CC, one of the things that we're really trying to focus on too, that hasn't been brought up yet when it comes to like making space with our elders, has been language justice, right? And that really just means meeting folks where they're at when it comes to language. In CCED, again, very multi-ethnic in Chinatown, we have a lot of Southeast Asians. And so sometimes our community tenant meetings have had about like, there's been Spanish, there's been English, but there's also been Canto, there's also been Mandarin folks jump in, as well as Khmer, and occasionally a Vietnamese person. So it's just like, you know, like there's just, language justice is really about like making sure we get that accessibility to our folks, but then also for ourselves, like me, like my personal thing has been like, I need to learn more Cantonese, right? Like if our elders who can usually speak like 3 different Chinese languages,
like can speak 3 different languages, like I can at least like take on one other language besides English, right? Or practice it. And then the other thing, hold on, we have notes. I like kind of need to check them just to make sure we like hit all our points. Yeah, so when it comes to the other thing too, when it comes to intergenerational solidarity, I think one of the things that we want to recognize is that like a lot of the folks young folks who are coming in have some kind of educational privilege, right? I am like an upwardly mobile like young person, and I think it's really important to recognize that my understanding of like class then is also very different in terms of like how things play out in the community, what exactly their needs are. And so part of it is just simply, again, when it comes to storytelling and holding space, it's centering the stories of our elders and youth, right? Like really making space for them very intentionally. And this all goes along with like both class lines, but also racial lines. And so one of the things that has been brought up has been like, how do we have conversations with elders about Anti Blackness and stuff like that? And like, I think to the points that have been made, like some of our elders like just don't know. And I think the beautiful part though, is that like we had these conversations too with our elders at a recent meeting, and it was really beautiful for them to just be curious, right? They're curious. They're like, what's going on? Why is this happening? And because we have the privilege to like know this information, have access to that history, when we talk to them about it, they're actually really quick on making the analysis and making the connection that like, hey, this is shared oppression. We have to be in solidarity with these Black folks, right? And so it's really beautiful because they are so like, again, someone else was saying like they have like a different knowledge set and a wisdom that like somewhat that I will not have, and it's really important to make sure we uplift their knowledges. Amy, did you have anything to add and other things?
Yeah, I apologize because there's so many helicopters over my neighborhood right now, just in very much keeping with the spirit of everything that's been going on. Definitely like everything Tito said, I think there's been so much resonance as well with like what's been said in Edmonton and what's been said in Oakland is like so much of intergenerational solidarity comes in like making time for our elders and meeting them where they're at and having these conversations with them, even if they're uncomfortable, across like class, race, and other lines. And for us, it really has been like, you know, taking that time and like sharing those resources and having those conversations with them that we see very much as like solidarity and building that solidarity between different folks. And I think that that's like the core thing that I wanted to add, but I think there was also something else that we wanted to bring up too, which is the mutual aid work that we've been doing in during, you know, all the shutdowns. And Tito, if you wanted to speak a little more to that.
Yeah, so I think like, mutual aid being like how we know that the government will not be there for us, right? History has shown us that the government will not take care of us, so we have to take care of ourselves. So I think, again, the importance of intergenerational solidarity is like, how are we supposed to know what people need if we have those relationships, right? And so we got to build those relationships, and once we build those relationships, then we figure out like, all right, how do we share our resources and really get people what they need? In Chinatown specifically, we've been having about every 2 weeks, we've literally been able to like get folks together to assemble care packages for our elders. And then like, depending on the elders' needs, sometimes it's every Tuesday and Thursday, they get like a prepared meal. Someone was saying in the chat how a lot of our folks live in like single residency occupancy buildings. And I want to highlight the fact that in terms of like the specifics of geography, what that means is that like our elders who are living in dorm style living situations, which means the chance of COVID is like significantly higher in terms of spread. So like being very much aware of that and understanding like the on the ground living conditions of our folks has been really important to like addressing the spread of COVID and just like taking care of each other. Because this is ultimately, at the end of the day, this is all about just taking care of each other. And it's just really about how do we make sure we listen very carefully to what folks are telling us when it comes to what they need. And being really mindful of like how this will affect this, because again, like if they're living in a dorm share like a place where they share the kitchen and they share the bathrooms, like how is someone supposed to isolate? Right? How are people supposed to stay 6 feet distant? So it's been really important for us to bring prepared meals to them, to at least minimize it. A lot of our elders in Chinatown specifically, we've been really hard hit with gentrification. We're really facing food scarcity because in the last year alone, 3 of our grocery stores were displaced, right? Because of developers and like new landlords. So knowing that, like, that's why our mutual aid has been incredibly important in terms of like making sure our elders get groceries, because now they have to bus in order to get processed goods. They have to bus really far away, and that's not safe for our elders either, right? And so they'll ask us, they'll tell us like, we need groceries, we want prepared meals, and like we do the best that we can to provide it. And I think, again, our mutual aid work is like really awesome because we're like going out there and we're giving them this direct service. But again, the foundation for any kind of work is the relationship building. So.
Word. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody drop your ones for LA, Oakland, CCED, APAL. You know, I'm seeing in the chat some folks need to dip out because it's almost 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you tuned in a little bit late, we had some technical difficulties, and so we actually began half an hour late. And so, you know, in the interest of time, if y'all do need to dip out at the top of this hour, thank you so much for joining us. But if you can stay, we have one last incredible conversation, and then because we're talking about so many complex and in some ways heavy topics, the way we'll be ending this is with my really good friend Nico Carey, who does mindful social justice work, and he'll lead us out into our Saturdays with a meditation so that we can kind of like channel that energy in a way that is most conducive to our beautiful weekends. But for those of you who do need to dip out, you know, at the top of the hour, thanks so much for joining us. This will be recorded, so you can catch the rest of that later on. But for everyone else, definitely invite you to hear the rest of this convo and you know, tune in for this meditation. So yeah, thank you again. Drop your ones again for CCED and APAL. And so for our final conversation, still on the topic of intergenerational solidarity, but extending it out into rootedness and resilience, and thinking about why Chinatowns were established in the first place, and you know, how people who maybe the early folks of Chinatown may have envisioned what we're doing now, and how do we honor that, and also honor you know, Chinatowns of the future, and set the stage for organizers in the future. I wanted to invite both CID out of Seattle, as well as POW out of Boston. We'll have POW go ahead and chime in first. Again, it's the POW Arts Center. We've got Cynthia Wu and Sungmin Kim sort of continuing what APAL and CCED were talking about. How do you think about intergenerational solidarity, and how do you envision that being transmitted beyond an interpersonal space and more into like really resonating across the Chinatown community and tradition?
Hi everyone, Adriel, thanks. This has been a really,
I'm so sorry. Sorry to interrupt you. I just realized that I want to take a moment real quick to allow for ASL interpreters to switch off. You know, drop your ones for the interpreters, yo. Been, you know, doing this liberation language, you know, stuff that's even hard to say at the mouth. So signing it, you know, appreciate y'all. All right. Sorry, Cynthia.
Oh, no problem. And I just great for WOW for organizing for ASL interpretation today. That's incredible, and we all need to be, at least we need to be working. I know that's an area we need to improve on. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone, or that's almost lunchtime for all you West Coasters too. I just want to talk a little bit, you know, the conversation has been so rich, but I want to just uplift a few points and thinking about intergenerational, but in terms of our relationship with history, and kind of how we can create relationships between organizations to help all of us preserve kind of Chinatown here in Boston for future generations. You know, of course, just like many other Chinatowns, Chinatowns really created here in Boston, for survival for you know, a bachelor society who's pushed to the margins in Boston as a protection against racial violence, but also as, you know, a social support system for relationships in a society without many women due to immigration policies, etc. I also wanted to organization in Chinatowns. We think about how there's this long history of fighting back, family associations, housing, Chinese American, the families are here. I'm seeing a note that's static. I don't know. Can everyone hear me, or is my internet?
It's breaking up a little bit. Maybe if you don't mind,
let me
just
turn off my video, maybe.
Okay. And then maybe like speak at like 75% of the pace that you're speaking in, so that our interpreters can catch up a little bit.
Sure. Thank you. Just talking about, give me a note if you can't hear again in the chat. A note about, I was talking about how there's a history of self-organizing. We have, you know, the Asian Community Development Corporation in town who's working on equitable housing in Chinatown to ensure that there's affordable housing for families. We have family associations who have created housing villages, so to ensure there's housing in the future in Chinatown. We have Chinatown youth advocating for a library, because Boston Chinatown was one of the, well, now the library is under renovation again, but it was the only neighborhood in Boston without a neighborhood library. And even the parent organization, that POW Art Center, was built out of Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center. It was a community-led came out 50 years ago to find resources for families. So what, you know, POW really sees the role, or how is the creation of an arts and cultural center really key to this work? You know, the creation of the center was a community-driven process as well. It was developed from an organization in it was involved many partners from the Asian Community Development Corporation, who developed this mixed use space that we actually sit in, and had the support of so many organizations such as South Cove Community Health Center, and just countless individuals in Chinatown who really wanted to see this succeed. And it's significant because this project really reclaimed a space in, excuse me, I'm just thinking, thank you, Cynthia. You started by teachers from Quincy School and parents, from what I believe, but thank you for the correction, Cynthia. The project came out of, it's really significant because there's a reclamation of this parcel of land that we actually sit on that was taken away from nearly 170 neighborhood families, and really shrunk Chinatown in half in the 50s and 60s, when Boston decided, the state actually decided to seize the land for eminent domain and cut Chinatown in half. So really creating this center here, that ensuring the culture and the preservation of this community is really represented in a space that's on the border of Chinatown, and borders have come up a couple times today. It really helps to ensure that, you know, Chinatown, let's hold down this border on this edge of Chinatown. And for many also, it's an opportunity for healing and trauma from the displacement of the 50s and 60s. Secondly, I wanted to just mention or talk a little bit about how these partnerships and creating this center really is a way to kind of create this cultural hub, not only for healing, but also a way to connect as many families are being displaced and can no longer live in Chinatown. What are ways that arts and culture can be used to ensure that people can have a space to return to? You know, Chinatown, like for many of us, still remains an essential part of our lives, or individuals' lives for services, groceries, etc. And culture can play a big role in it. You know, I think when Adriel mentioned in the opening that visceral memory that we all have of Chinatown, sights, smells, tastes, how can we make sure that these spaces still exist for future generations? And I wanted to also just, third point, is talk about how through these arts and cultural activities, we can really provide an opportunity to connect through community partnerships and building relationships, as Stanley and Tito also mentioned, and how that can be a really way to amplify community voices and concerns. One of the programs that I just wanted to, I have an intern here with me, Sung Min, to just briefly say one or two things about is our Residence Lab program that we have been working on with the Asian Community Development Corporation, our partner, in which we have Chinatown residents and local creatives work together to create public art that promotes Chinatown's cultural identity and well-being. So I just wanted to pass it over to Sun Ming for a few minutes to talk about her experience in the last.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Sung Min. I'm an intern at POW, and I've been working closely with Residence Lab. And just to give you a little sense of what the program looks like on the ground, we come together it's a cohort of 6 people right now, 4 residents and 2 artists. And we come together in weekly learning workshops where we learn about each other, storytelling, public art, and Chinatown history. And, you know, the folks at CCED were talking about the embodied practice of intergenerational solidarity as that of storytelling. And that's exactly what we also ground in Residence Lab as well, where we really emphasize the connection between these people to eventually manifest itself in a public art form that serves a community. So just to give a quick overview of the breadth and diversity of the program and the members, there's a 21-year-old college student artist, there's a Chinese immigrant in her 50s, there is a Chinese American woman who grew up in Chinatown her whole life, and there's also a Puerto Rican resident who used to live in Jamaica Plain, which is actually historically Black and Latinx neighborhood, and we also hold in guest facilitators from Little Tokyo in LA. So it's really, we're trying to bring together a rich breadth of like backgrounds, histories, cultures, under this idea of placemaking strategy where we center the voices and needs of Chinatown residents and giving them the opportunity to shape Chinatown culture in public art form. So in Residence Lab, we frame art as a tool to dream big, to not only promote tangible concerns such as housing, but to help us be bold and constantly strive for the emotional, cultural, and holistic well-being of Chinatown. And actually one of our workshops, we asked the residents and artists what kind of future they wanted to see and what they thought Chinatown needed in this moment. And actually one of our residents answered that she wanted to keep the love and community that she already, that already exists in the present. And this was just incredibly powerful to me because this was a resident saying that the future of Chinatown is already in the present. And I see the work of POW Arts Center along with residents and artists as constantly materializing these visions of Chinatown that are all at once the past, present, and the future.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody drop your ones for POW Arts Center. Thank you. Thank you. You know, definitely last but not least, I feel like actually bringing in Seattle and the Chinatown International Coalition is just like a beautiful way to cap off this conversation, because Seattle's Chinatown is a Chinatown / international district, right? And like you've heard a lot of folks here, you know, like unbeknownst to I think many people in this country and in this world, like Chinatowns aren't exclusively Chinatown, right? And so when we talk about things like bound liberations and solidarities, we're also talking about like within among different Asian ethnicities, as well as, different BIPOC communities as well. And so, so Yin Yu, do you mind coming in and speaking a little bit about what rootedness and resilience looks like for you with the Chinatown International Coalition?
Yes, hi everybody. Thanks for letting me close out this lovely time. I'm part of the CID Coalition, located in the Suquamish territory, and we're a grassroots collective that is femme, non-binary, QPOC led. So I wish there was more young people speaking with us, but here I am with the honor and privilege of speaking. So Seattle is known as the Chinatown International District because we have Japantown, Little Saigon, Manila Town. And to give a little context, we named our current 3-year struggle, Hambao's Not Hot Dogs is how you find us on Facebook, social media, and it dates back to the 60s and 70s when they had a fought against Hambao's Not Hot Dogs, fighting the stadiums. And so we're continuing the legacy of resistance and resilience. And out of that, this year is also the 50th year of Fort Loughton, a military fort that the urban natives occupied, and they took it back. It became Daybreak Star, and a cultural center. And that also led to a creation of Gang of Four, where we had Bernie Whitebear that came out as the leader for that occupation. El Centro de la Rosa was another occupation, an elementary school that the Spanish community took over, and that was inspired by the previous occupation. Bernie Whitebear was, Roberto Maestas was the leader from that. And so for the Chinatown International District, we have Uncle Bob as the leader that helped to cultivate culturally aware medical centers and services for this area, for this neighborhood. So we build off this work, not off the shoulders of the previous resistance. Where we're currently located is the 3rd location of Chinatown. On the left is Smith Tower, which was the first skyscraper in Seattle. It gentrified the 2nd location of Chinatown. On the photo on the right is there was a resistance of communities of Black and Asians that fought the interstate, I-5 interstate, from being built and cutting through the Chinatown International Districts, demolishing 5,000 homes. And so with our history of the resistance with the city and with development, this is how we're doing our work. We ground our work in justice and equity. We quote our Uncle Bob saying that we want to preserve our neighborhood for the people who built it. Growth should come from within, and we're the ones who should dictate that growth. So our militancy, our direct action is the continuation of this work. And us taking over a design review board, making sure the community voice is part of that discussion, as developers are fighting to develop 17 stories, is part of this resiliency, militancy. And accountable love ethic is one that we quote often, because we hold ourselves accountable when there's ageism, when patriarchy and all this stuff surfaces, be able to call ourselves through that journey of love and growth. And I think part of this conversation is that we've, out of this, have built an anti-displacement network. Shout out to Tito, Francis, Tamia, Aya, all of our friends that have been part of the Coast to Coast conversations. Recently, we held a conversation in December in Seattle with Red Canary Song, really learning about what does decriminalized sex work mean? What does legalized sex work mean? And what does Nordic model mean? And why are the sex workers pushing for decriminalized? As Seattle now is talking about decriminalized Seattle, and we're pushing for defund our police department. What does it mean to be grounded in that analysis? Yes, so we're part of the bigger conversation network because we're growing and we're learning. We started in Philly, this displacement network, talking about outwashing, and now have been holding week of actions so that grounding this most in relationships. So
Yeah.
shout out to the Coast Network.
What? No, it's just me.
I don't know who that is. Lastly, I just want to plug Busch Garden, which is where the Gang of Four and other folks had, drank karaoke, and, they're also fighting displacement right now. There's a developer who grew up in the neighborhood, is wanting to build and demolish this precious gem that is grounding our resistance. So shout out to Busch Garden, who we love and support, and hope y'all will stay in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's so beautiful, so beautiful. Everybody drop your ones for all of our speakers, everybody coming in. I've learned so much about these Chinatowns. Yeah, I just learned so much today. I feel like I'm someone who's definitely guilty of, like, when I come into a Chinatown, I've got bows on my mind, and I think oftentimes, I can, like, kind of, I lose focus on just how much incredible work is being done, not for the sole purpose of making sure that we have bows, but one of the perks, long live the smells, long live the green slime. All right, so again, just wanted to say thank you so much. Everyone also please drop your ones for the interpreters. They've been doing an incredible job over here. So Travis Wen, Glashonda Lawyer, doing some amazing work. So before we tune out, let me just kind of shout out again really quickly. I want to specifically just name the different cities and organizations that have been involved, and then I'm going to pass you on to Nico Carey for a guided meditation. So if you've got the time to sit through that, I feel like it's a beautiful way to, go out into your Saturday and kind of, I know if you're like me, you've just got oh my God, there's all these different concepts. And so I'm gonna, I'm really thankful to have Nico here to help us sort of internalize that a bit. But before that, and before I sign off, again, wanted to shout out to Seattle and the Chinatown International District Coalition, to Oakland and APAL, the Asian Youth Promoting Advocacy and Leadership, San Francisco, Chinese Culture Center of San Francisco, to Los Angeles and the Chinatown Community for Equitable Development, to Edmonton and the Aya Collective, to Boston, the Chinese Progressive Association's Chinese Youth Initiative and the Powell Art Center, and Washington, D.C. with the 1882 Project. I'll also drop a couple of links from the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. We didn't speak too much about that today. It's not about us, but I'll drop some links. We put together a care package at the beginning of COVID, with some mindful practice artworks that been created over the years. And so if you enjoy, especially if you enjoy the meditation, if you're new to meditation and would like to learn more, you can do that as well. And for the interpreters, Travis, you've been working hard. So if you want to do a final switch, now would be a good time to do that. And so yeah, I'm going to introduce Nico Carey. He's one of my best friends. We have this collective called Illiteracy. We began as a spoken word music collective, and we did the work of traveling throughout the country, bridging Asian American and African American student organizations, going to places like Charlottesville, Auburn, Alabama, and oftentimes, just bringing groups of people together that for no reason other than kind of existing culture had not come together before. Nico himself is Black and fifth generation Chinese, and I've had the pleasure of really just seeing him grow creatively and grow his spirit and his mind in this. And so without further ado, everyone drop your ones for Nico and this meditation to lead us out. Thank you, everybody. My name is Adriel Lewis. Peace.
Thank you, Adriel, and hello, everyone. Hi, can you hear me all right? Just want to make sure.
Yes, we can. We can hear you and see you.
Okay, great. So yeah, hi, my name is Nico. I am a mindfulness facilitator for an organization called Insight LA, which is a nonprofit mindfulness-based organization here. I also pull a lot of my practices from the Medicine Path Native American Church in Berkeley, where I'm from. It's such a privilege for me to be here and to bear witness to this conversation, really, and to transition us into whatever's next for our day with a meditation. So thank you so much for having me. I also have to say, just as a Black and Chinese dude, I've never been in a conversation more relevant to my life. So really, truly, thank you for making that experience possible today. And yeah, to metabolize this morning, afternoon, we'll be sitting together for just about 10 minutes. We'll be doing a simple guided breath meditation. Just kind of settle the body after all that has unfolded today. But to contextualize the practice a little bit before we get started, I just wanted to point to, acknowledge and really appreciate the profound collective wisdom here to ground this series in an understanding of care as medicine, which for me also includes self-care. I think, as I heard in the Intergenerational Solidarity dialogue, over the years of doing anti-racism, social justice work, I continue to find that solidarity and coalition building, resiliency, social justice and equity work, really the work of transforming power, are all local and relational, which is to say that they begin with the body, what is happening in the body, how we attend to it, and how that gets enacted in the world through our relationships. So, we all know the experience of being angry and then having a conversation that didn't quite go as planned, you know what I mean? Versus knowing there's discomfort in the body, how to care for it, and then the possibility of a different expression that might come from that. So, which is all to say, one way to hold what it is we're doing when we meditate is really just to think about it as listening to the body, deep listening, This is a practice, mindfulness practice in particular, is a practice to listen to the body and learn from it. So that's what we'll be doing for just a little bit right now. No worries if you have never meditated before. The good news is you can't do anything wrong here. We'll sit for just about 10 minutes and we will start and stop with the sound of this bell. Okay. So thank you for your practice and thank you for today. And before I ring the bell, if you haven't done so, maybe just taking a moment to find a sitting posture that is comfortable for you. Or if you've been sitting for too long, feel free to stand up or lay down, whatever feels good for the body. But yeah, just getting a little comfortable. So if it's comfortable for you, just allowing the eyes to close. And if not, feel free to leave the eyes open, but maybe with a soft gaze directed a few feet in front of you toward the ground. The closed eyes or soft gaze can help us turn inward. There have been a lot of words shared, a lot of really powerful, insightful provocative, beautiful words shared today. Yeah, those might still be active in the body, in the mind. As much as possible, maybe just trusting that all of it will be there in a few moments. And for this moment, and just let it settle as much as possible. Maybe even the activity of the day is still with you, still moving around in the body, like an energetic imprint. Also okay, just as much as possible, letting it settle for this moment. If it's comfortable for you, maybe even opening this meditation with a couple deeper breaths, paying particular attention to the rise and fall of the shoulders and any sense of ease that might come from the shoulders dropping. So breathing in a little deeper. And out. And at your own pace, maybe 2 more deep breaths. So here we are, as they say, seated halfway between heaven and hell. All that has ever happened behind us and all that will ever happen in front of us. Here we are taking our seats at this dynamic intersection of what it is to be alive. And as we sit here, if there's any obvious tension, you can maybe easily let go of. I invite you to do so. Maybe softening the face. Sometimes when the mind is active, it can show up in the face. Softening the brow, the eyes if they're closed a little tight. Softening the jaw. Softening the shoulders. Maybe breathing in, and on the exhale, seeing if you can soften the heart and the belly. And just feeling into the body, sitting here in physical space, the soft animal body. Perhaps feeling a sense of gravity anywhere the body is making contact with the surface, and sense of pressure there. Maybe feeling how you are totally supported by the earth all the time. And how maybe we can let go and just rest here for a moment. Now with this embodied attention, maybe just beginning to notice the play of your experience, the sounds, the feelings, the thoughts, the sensations, whatever's here right now. And after just a moment or so, maybe notice how easily the attention is drawn elsewhere. Yeah, stories about the past or planning about the future. So to deepen the sense of presence underneath all of the waves of thoughts and sensations and sounds, maybe just letting yourself become aware of the wave of the breath underneath all of the rest of it. It's just becoming aware of the breath, the body breathing itself. Noticing the breath wherever it is easy to notice it. The tip of the nose, and the rise and fall of the chest or belly. Maybe feeling it throughout the entire body. Centering yourself just here with the breath. And as the body breathes the air of the earth, truly interdependent with all things, as much as possible, just feeling a sense of calming, steadying that can come with the breath. And as we begin to settle, just invite you to bring to mind something you might be grateful for. It can be something really small or really big. Just anything that inspires a sense of gratitude. It could be the space you're in, and the land you're on. It could be the smiling face of a friend or a loved one. It could be this conversation this morning and afternoon. Bringing to mind whatever might make you feel a sense of gratitude, and just noticing where it lands in the body, resting with it for a moment. And for these last few moments of the meditation, just a few words from Naira Wahid. If the ocean can calm itself, so can you. We are both salt water mixed with air. Whenever you're ready, just slowly allowing the eyes to open and readjust to sight, colors, shapes, maybe the screen. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for that practice and sitting with me. Yeah, and thank you for today. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Nico. That was beautiful and exactly what I needed to close out. I feel bad shifting the energy. Like I just feeling very at peace right now. But I just wanted to take a moment here as we end to say that these conversations are just the beginning. We touched on so much today, and all the things we touched on and the things we didn't deserve so much more space and attention. And I hope we can continue having these important and fruitful conversations in the future. And just wanted to take a moment to plug WOW's fundraiser again. We're trying to raise $50,000, 50% of which will go towards our 5th year of programming, and the other 50% will be split between 2 organizations. Speaking for myself, I'll say that WOW is so special and so important to community because it allowed me to enter as I am, even when your worst tech nightmares occur. But I've also witnessed the magic that happens when everyone else and folks come together as they are, and we learn and nurture from each other and work towards the future we want to imagine and see. So I hope you'll consider donating and amplifying our campaign. You can find more information on our Support Us tab on our website or going to our Facebook. And before I begin my closeout, I just also wanted to mention we'll be sending a feedback form out, and we would appreciate if you would take a minute to fill it out and respond to it. We can always do better, and we want to be accountable to our community. So now I just want to move on to my thank yous. So thank you so much to all of our speakers for being here and taking the time to share your wisdom with everyone. I'm so lucky to be learning and unlearning with all of you. Thank you for making the space we've created here so electric and precious. To Travis and Gloshanda, thank you so much for being here, for helping us practice language liberation. We appreciate you so, so much. To our moderator, Adriel, I also just want to express my gratitude for everything you've done to steward this program and make it a reality with us. Thank you so much for your energy and thoughtfulness you've brought. Can we just put some ones in the chat and hashtag nervous Sheen for Adriel for the past 2 hours? Thank you so much. I want to thank the WOW team behind the scenes right now, Kristen, Joy, Bonnie, Nizma, and May. Clara, thank you so much. This also would not have been possible without you. And lastly, I want to thank our audience. Thank you for being adaptive and resilient, especially in the first half hour. I'm giving ones to you right now. And lastly, I want to close out by amplifying an invitation I recently heard from Nikita Mitchell, the national coordinator of the Rising Majority. We are told that the issues we face are personal ones. They're unique to our families, to our home, and to our people. Yet the truth is that it isn't. The issues of the police killing Black folks is not different from the US government supporting military forces across the country and the globe. Because it's not personal, because it's a collective issue, it will take all of us, and I mean all of us, to undo it and ensure that we can all live in our dignity, in our humanity. Will you join in with me? Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful Saturday.